"Sir, I can help your daughter walk again." The words came quietly, but with a conviction that made the air feel heavier. Miles Grant, a man known for never freezing, even in boardrooms worth billions, stopped mid-step just outside the entrance to Fulton Children's Rehabilitation Center. His arms tightened instinctively around his daughter, Lila, who lay silently against his chest. She was 6, bundled in a soft fleece blanket, her head resting against his shoulder, her legs unmoving since the accident. He turned slowly, scanning for the voice, his eyes landing on a boy no older than 10. The child stood at the edge of the walkway near the revolving doors, his coat frayed at the seams, one boot barely held together by silver duct tape, and a faded red beanie pulled low across his forehead. Miles blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly, but the boy stood calmly, clutching a weather-worn notebook beneath one arm and looking up at him, not with arrogance or a plea for help, but with something even more disarming: belief. The man stared for a moment longer, then scoffed under his breath, turned, and walked inside. But even as the automatic doors slid closed behind him, those words echoed, not like a child's fantasy, not like a scam, but like something certain inside. He tried to focus. He sat through another morning of hushed voices and sympathetic glances from physical therapists, neurologists, and pediatric specialists. Slow progress, not uncommon. We'll keep monitoring. They spoke as if reciting a script, their eyes never quite meeting his. Miles nodded, asked polite questions, signed forms, and thanked them all. But his mind kept drifting, to the boy with duct tape on his boots who said he could heal. It should have been absurd, and yet it gnawed at him, not just the words, but how they were said. Lila remained quiet throughout her sessions, eyes distant, disconnected. She didn't react to the colorful posters or the cheerful staff. Even the therapy dog didn't earn a smile. She had been like this since the crash that took her mother's life and left her in a wheelchair. Miles had poured every resource into her recovery: private specialists, imported equipment, custom home renovations, but none of it brought her back. She had folded into herself like a flower refusing to bloom. And now, a kid, barely taller than the wheelchair itself, had dared to say he could fix what the world's best doctors could not. That night, after tucking Lila into bed and setting her teddy bear by her side, Miles sat in his home office, surrounded by stacks of paperwork he didn't read. The glow of the desk lamp cast long shadows across the walls. He leaned back, fingers steepled against his chin, and closed his eyes. He thought of the boy again, his tone, his steadiness, the way he didn't chase after them or ask for money, just stood there, watching, waiting. It was unnerving how much presence he carried, like someone who had seen more than his age should allow. Lila's voice drifted from the hallway, soft and hesitant. "Daddy?" Miles looked up. "Yeah. Baby?" She stood at the door in her wheelchair, fingers clutching the armrests. "That boy today." She paused, swallowing. "He looked like he believed me, like he believed I could walk." Miles's throat tightened. "You think so?" She nodded slowly, like he already saw it happen. For a moment, Miles couldn't speak. He rose, walked over, and knelt beside her. "Do you want to see him again?" She nodded again, more firmly this time. "Tomorrow?" he asked. "Okay." The next morning, as the sun hung low in the Atlanta sky, streaks of gold slicing through the mist, Miles dressed Lila carefully and loaded her into the Escalade. They drove in silence until they reached the edge of Piedmont Park. It was just before noon. There, seated on a wooden bench near an old oak tree, was the same boy. Hood still pulled low, notebook set aside, a small duffel bag resting at his feet. He looked up as they approached but didn't stand immediately, just nodded once, as if he'd known they would return. "What's your name?" Miles asked. "Jaden Rivers." He offered no last name, no story, just that. Miles glanced at the bag. "What's in there?" "Stuff my mom used to use when she helped people." Jaden said, "She was a physical therapist. I watched her work. She said hands can speak louder than machines if you listen right." Miles raised an eyebrow. "And how old are you?" 10. Jaden pulled out a towel, a rice pack, a small jar of cocoa butter, and a tennis ball with the fuzz worn down. "If it's okay," he said, turning to Lila, "I'd like to work with your legs for a little bit. Won't hurt. I promise. And if anything feels weird, just say stop." She looked up at her dad. He hesitated, then nodded. "Go slow." Jaden smiled, not like a child, but like a healer preparing his tools. He knelt down, wrapped the warm rice cloth across her thighs, and waited a few minutes before starting gentle motions, rotating her joints slowly, checking for resistance, speaking softly the whole time. Not about muscles or nerves, but about colors, cartoons, what flavor ice cream she liked best. It wasn't therapy in the way Miles had seen it done. It was something else, something older. He stood watching, arms crossed, ready to jump in if needed. But he didn't, because for the first time in months, Lila was laughing at a joke Jaden made about clouds shaped like dinosaurs. Laughing as he tapped her knee and asked if she could feel it. Even when she said no, Miles didn't realize his jaw had unclenched. His eyes stung. "You do this often?" he asked. "Sometimes," Jaden said. "When someone needs it." "And you live where?" Jaden just looked down. "Around." Miles didn't press. Instead, he looked at his daughter. Her face was brighter, her hands no longer clenched, her shoulders relaxed, and Miles, despite everything he thought he knew, began to feel something dangerous, something terrifying. Hope. The following Sunday came sooner than expected, not because the week had passed quickly, but because something had changed in Miles Grant's household, a subtle shift that neither money nor medicine had ever stirred. His daughter, Lila, woke up early without being asked. She chose her own clothes, even insisted on brushing her own hair, which she hadn't done since the accident. Miles noticed how she kept glancing out the window like she was waiting for something, or someone. He didn't ask questions. He simply packed a water bottle, a small blanket, and drove them both back to Piedmont Park. They arrived at exactly noon. Jaden Rivers was already there, seated cross-legged on the same bench near the old oak tree. His jacket looked the same, patched and too big, but his presence was solid, grounded, this time. He had laid out the towel in advance and lined up his items like a soldier preparing a field kit, warm rice wrapped in cloth, a tennis ball smoothed from use, the jar of cocoa butter now almost empty. He looked up and smiled, not a grin, but a quiet welcome, and greeted Lila first. "Hi, Lila," he said gently. She blinked. "How did you know my name?" "You said it last time." Jaden answered. "I remember things." Miles stood behind her, watching the interaction. Arms folded tighter than necessary, not out of distrust anymore, but from the discomfort of realizing that a homeless boy remembered more about his daughter than he had in months. Without being prompted, Jaden knelt beside Lila's chair and began the same routine. Heat over her thighs, gentle rotations at the hips and knees, questions whispered like secrets. "What's your favorite animal? If you could fly, Where would you go? Which cartoon character would win in a race? As before, Lila responded slowly at first, but soon her voice grew steadier, her laugh more frequent. It was hard for Miles to believe that something so simple, a rice pack, a child's touch, a conversation, could create more change than the thousands he'd spent on hospital-grade treatments. But it was happening, and even if he didn't understand it, he could not deny it. Still, skepticism ran deep in him, so he asked the questions he hadn't dared to ask last time. Where are your parents? Jaden didn't stop working. My mom passed. It was just the two of us. She worked at a free clinic downtown. She used to say movement was like music. Everyone has their own rhythm. You just have to listen for it. Miles hesitated. And your dad? Never met him? Jaden's voice didn't waver. She said he was gone before I was born. Miles glanced at the boy's belongings. And now you live where? Jaden shrugged. Sometimes a friend's stairwell. Sometimes I stay by the loading docks behind the old theater. Depends. Miles bit down hard on the inside of his cheek. He was staring at a kid who had nothing. No home, no family, no safety net. And yet here he was, spending his Sundays trying to make someone else whole, as if sensing the heaviness of the moment. Jaden suddenly looked up at him. Don't worry, he said. I don't steal, and I don't expect anything. Miles blinked, unsure whether to feel ashamed or impressed. Maybe both. I wasn't thinking that. He lied. Jaden gave a small nod and turned back to Lila. Do you feel this? He asked, tapping lightly above her ankle. A little, she whispered. Her voice was so soft Miles almost missed it. But Jaden heard. He nodded once, like a coach clocking a victory lap, then turned to Miles. That's something. She said that before. Miles replied too quickly. During other sessions? But nothing came of it. Maybe, Jaden said calmly. But maybe those sessions were inside rooms full of machines. Maybe she gets scared in rooms like that. Some kids tighten up when everything feels like metal and wires. But here, he gestured at the breeze, the open sky, the sound of kids playing soccer in the distance. Here, it's just people. Miles didn't respond. He couldn't. He looked at his daughter, who was now lifting her hand to block the sun while talking to Jaden about ice cream flavors, and realized her voice hadn't trembled once in the past 10 minutes. That night, back at home, after dinner and brushing Lila's teeth, Miles lingered at her doorway longer than usual. Hey, he said. You doing okay? She smiled. I like when Jaden talks to me. He doesn't look at my legs when he talks. Miles blinked. What do you mean? People always look at my chair first, she explained. But he looks at my face, like I'm still me. Miles swallowed hard and nodded. You are still you, baby. She turned her head toward the window. Quiet again. I think he's magic, she whispered. Magic? Not fairy magic, she added quickly. But the kind that makes people feel better, inside. Miles didn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about how Jaden hadn't asked for anything, not $1, not a ride, not even food. But there had been a moment, just a flash, when the boy pulled up his sleeve and Miles caught a glimpse of an old burn scar down his forearm. Faded, but still raw. It looked like the kind of injury that had never been treated properly. Something born from neglect, or worse. That image haunted Miles more than the silence of the house. It reminded him that Jaden's calm wasn't natural. It had been built, under pressure, through pain. And the next morning, when he looked out his kitchen window and saw Lila wheeling herself unprompted down the hallway toward her books, he made a decision. He called his assistant, canceled his Monday meetings, and set a reminder, Sunday, noon, park, no more distractions, no more delay, because something was happening. And whether it was therapy, hope, or something deeper, he wasn't going to let it pass them by. The third Sunday felt different from the moment they arrived. The sky hung lower, gray and heavy, and the breeze carried the sharpness of early winter, the kind that stung your knuckles but made you feel alive. Miles pulled the Escalade to the same spot near Piedmont Park, but instead of Lila staring blankly out the window like she used to, she was already unbuckling her seatbelt, asking her father if Jaden would be wearing the same red beanie again. Miles chuckled under his breath and lifted her into the wheelchair. He didn't say it aloud, but he was surprised too. Surprised by how much his daughter had changed in just 2 weeks. She smiled more. She asked questions again. And last night, for the first time since the accident. She had asked if he could leave the bedroom light off. That quiet resilience, that flicker of independence, had cracked something open in him, something he'd buried under piles of work and the weight of his own guilt. They found Jaden in his usual spot beneath the oak tree, the bench now dusted with fallen leaves. But this time, something was different. The boy was holding his arm. It was wrapped in what looked like a cut-up t-shirt, and his jacket sleeve had been ripped at the elbow. His face lit up when he saw them, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Miles narrowed his gaze as he wheeled Lila over. "What happened to your arm?" he asked. Jaden shrugged. "Had a rough night. Got caught sleeping in the wrong place." Miles felt his stomach twist. He didn't push further. Instead, he watched as the boy set up his routine with one hand, unrolling the towel, positioning the rice pack, uncapping the cocoa butter jar with his teeth. Lila noticed. "2. Did someone hurt you?" she asked softly. Jaden didn't answer right away. Then, "Some folks don't like people who have nowhere to be." The words fell flat but heavy. Miles knelt beside him. "You shouldn't be out here alone. Jaden, this isn't safe." "Neither is being forgotten," Jaden replied, his voice quiet but even. "At least here, people know my name. At least here, I can help." There was something in that statement, something that struck Miles in the chest harder than any business deal ever had. Jaden wasn't just surviving. He was choosing to matter, even when the world told him he didn't. They began the session. Jaden, ever focused, gently massaged Lila's calves, moved her toes side to side, tapped on her shin and asked, "Can you feel that?" She shook her head at first, but then, on the 4th repetition, she blinked and whispered, "It feels like fuzz, like something tickling." Jaden smiled softly. "That's your nerves waking up. Sometimes they're like kids hiding under the bed. You have to coax them out slowly." Miles leaned forward, hands on his knees. "You really believe this works?" "I don't believe it," Jaden said, pausing. "I've seen it." And for the first time, he told them a story. "There was this man, big guy, Army vet. My mom used to treat him at the church basement downtown. He hadn't walked in 5 years after his spine got fractured. Everyone gave up on him. But she didn't. Every Thursday, she showed up, stretch by stretch, inch by inch. After 9 months, he stood, not long, just 5 seconds, but I was there. I saw it." He looked directly at Miles. "It's slow. It's frustrating. It hurts sometimes. But the body remembers. You just have to remind it gently." Miles didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat was too tight. Jaden turned to Lila again. "Let's try something new," he said. "You tell me when I touch your foot. Don't look. Just feel." He placed a hand lightly on her toes. Lila squinted, concentrated. "Now?" "Nope." He tried again. "Now?" She smiled. "Yes." Jaden nodded. "Good. That means your brain is still talking to your body. The line's just a little fuzzy right now. Miles leaned back, processing what he was witnessing. This boy, barely 10, who had no medical degree, no safety, not even a proper place to sleep, understood things that adults around him had forgotten, things about persistence, about touch, about the slow miracle of effort. After the session ended, Jaden began to pack up. Miles stopped him. "You have somewhere to go tonight?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. But it wasn't convincing. "You eat today?" Jaden shrugged. "Had half a granola bar this morning." Miles took a breath. "Let me buy you dinner." "I'm good," Jaden said quickly. "I mean it. I don't do this for food." "I know you don't," Miles replied. "But I'm offering because I want to, not because you asked." Jaden finally looked up and nodded. "Okay, but just fries." That evening, they sat on a park bench eating drive-through takeout. Lila laughed at how many ketchup packets Jaden used, and Miles couldn't help but laugh too. It felt right, like a family dinner in disguise. After they finished, Miles offered Jaden a ride somewhere. The boy declined. "I walk. Keeps me warm." But before he left, Lila reached out and touched his bandaged arm. "You're strong," she said. Jaden smiled. "Not always, but I try to be when it counts." Then he disappeared into the dark like a whisper carried off by wind. Back home, Miles tucked Lila into bed, then sat in his office again. But this time, he didn't open his laptop. He just sat there, thinking, remembering the scar on Jaden's arm, the way he flinched when touched too suddenly, the way he smiled only halfway. And then, something Lila had said earlier replayed in his head. "He looks at me like I'm still me." Miles felt something crack inside his chest, a place that had gone numb since the day of the crash. That night, he didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling and thought about a boy who healed without asking for anything in return. And he made a silent promise to himself. Whatever this is, it's not going to end in a park. Not for him. Not for her. The fourth Sunday arrived cloaked in silence. The kind of silence that clings to the walls of a house. Not loud, but heavy. Miles had noticed it early that morning when he knocked on Lila's door and didn't hear her usual, "Come in," when he peeked inside. She was sitting in her wheelchair, still in pajamas, staring at her hands. No cartoons, no books, no sign of her usual eagerness to get to the park. He crouched down and touched her arm. "You okay, sweetheart?" She shook her head. "I'm not going today." Miles blinked. "Why not?" She hesitated. Then the words came fast, like they'd been rehearsed all night. "Because nothing's changing. I try every week. I try so hard and I still can't move right. It's just not working." Her voice cracked at the end, and Miles could feel the frustration bleeding through her clenched jaw. It was more than just disappointment. It was despair. He didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to say, "We'll try again next week," but another part of him, wounded and worn, understood that even hope, when stretched too far, can tear. Still. He helped her get dressed in silence, folding her scarf gently around her neck, not because she asked, but because somewhere in his heart he felt she needed him to. When they pulled into the usual spot, Jaden was already there as always, kneeling on the grass, folding his towel with practiced care. But when he saw them, he immediately sensed something was off. Lila didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't even look up. Miles wheeled her forward. "She doesn't want to do it today," he said flatly. Jaden looked at her, then back at Miles. "What happened?" Miles shook his head. "She's tired. Says she's done trying." Jaden nodded slowly. Then he stepped forward and knelt beside her chair. "Lila," he said gently. She didn't respond. "You think I don't get tired too?" Still nothing. So he kept going. "You think I didn't cry the night I watched my mom try to treat herself because we couldn't afford the hospital? You think I didn't want to give up when I had to sleep in a dumpster last week because someone lit my cardboard bed on fire?" Her eyes flickered, just slightly, but it was enough. Jaden leaned in. "You're allowed to be mad. I get mad too. I get scared. I feel like the world's too big and I'm too small. But if you stop now, the part of you that wants to walk might stop trying too." That did it. Her lower lip quivered. Then she looked away, whispering, "I'm scared." It was the first time she had admitted it out loud, not just to Jaden or her father, but to herself. Jaden nodded, his voice steady. "Me too. But scared doesn't mean stop. It just means something important is close. You're close. Lila, don't quit right before the turn." A tear rolled down her cheek, and this time, she didn't wipe it away. Miles stood frozen, unable to speak, for the first time since the accident. He saw his daughter not as broken, not as fragile, but as someone in the middle of a fight he didn't know how to win. But she was fighting anyway. Jaden unzipped his bag and gently lifted the rice pack. "We'll go slow today. No big moves, just reminders." He placed the warmth over her knees and waited. After a minute, she nodded. Quiet, but willing. He began the routine, lighter than usual. No questions about cartoons this time. No jokes, just his presence. Just his voice when she needed to hear it. Miles sat on the edge of the grass, leaning forward, watching every motion, and then it happened. About halfway through the session, Jaden tapped her ankle gently. "Can you try again?" he asked. "Just think about moving your foot. You don't have to make it happen. Just think about it really hard." Lila took a deep breath. Her brow furrowed. Her hands gripped the chair, and then her right foot slid forward. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't fast, but it moved. On purpose. With intent. Jaden looked up, but didn't say anything. He knew better than to make it bigger than it was. He let the moment land on its own. Lila blinked, shocked. "Did I?" Miles dropped to his knees. "Do it again." She focused. And again. The foot moved, only a few inches, but those inches felt like miles. "I did it," she whispered. "You did," Jaden said quietly. "You really did." For a long moment, no one moved. The park, the sky, even the breeze seemed to pause. And then Lila exhaled, leaned back, and smiled. One of those slow smiles that starts in the heart and travels up to the corners of the eyes. Jaden began packing up, his own hands slightly trembling now. But before he could zip his bag, Lila reached out and touched his wrist. "Thank you," she said, "for not giving up on me." Jaden smiled, not wide, but deep. "My mom wouldn't have, so I won't," that night, after dinner. Miles stood at the window of his study, looking out at the backyard but seeing something else entirely. He saw his daughter's foot slide forward, over and over again. He saw the way Jaden had knelt beside her, not as a child, but as a partner in her healing. And for the first time in years, he realized that the most extraordinary thing he'd ever witnessed hadn't come from power or money. It came from a boy with duct-taped boots and the kind of heart this world doesn't know how to measure. By the fifth Sunday, something had shifted, not just in Lila's legs, but in everything. She greeted Jaden with a confidence that startled even Miles, waving as they approached, her curls bouncing as she smiled wide enough to wrinkle her nose. Miles had brought a second mat this time, unrolled it beside Jaden's towel like he'd always meant to be part of it. He still wore his designer watch and custom loafers, but they looked oddly out of place as he knelt beside the two children. Jaden offered him a quick smile, then got straight to work, heating the rice packs on a small battery-powered warmer Mrs. Whitaker had lent him, its cord fraying at the edges. Lila was eager, trying to help by lifting her knees slightly before he even asked. And when Jaden gently tapped her heel, she responded with a press that made her dad's breath catch. "Did you feel that?" Miles asked. "I did," Jaden replied, not looking up. "She's learning to connect again, like plugging a cord back into a wall." The session moved with a rhythm now, a shared language of motion, breath, and eye contact. But as they continued, a shadow crept in. A man stood watching from across the walking path, phone in hand, brows furrowed. Jaden noticed first, but said nothing. The man wore a badge on his belt and a judgment on his face. After a while, he approached. "Sir," he said to Miles, not unkindly but with tension underneath. "That boy. Do you know him?" Miles rose slowly, brushing off his knees. "Yes. His name's Jaden. He's helping my daughter." The man looked Jaden up and down. "You know he's been reported sleeping behind Midtown Station? A few business owners complained, said he's been seen digging in trash bins." Jaden said nothing. He didn't even flinch. Miles felt something rise in him, something hot and defensive. "Is he being accused of something?" "No," the man said. "Just letting you know, you have a kid. You just want to make sure you're safe." "He is safe," Miles said, more firmly. "Safer than half the people we paid to treat her." The man nodded reluctantly and walked away. Jaden began rolling up his towel, his hands quieter than usual. "You okay?" Miles asked. "I'm used to it," Jaden replied. "People think because you sleep outside, you must be dangerous." "You're not," Miles said. "I know," Jaden whispered, barely audible. That night, back at home, Lila asked the question Miles had been dreading. "Can Jaden come live with us?" It wasn't said with innocence. It was said with the clarity of someone who knew what kindness cost. Miles sat beside her bed, smoothing the blanket across her legs. "You think he'd want to?" She shrugged. "He never asks for anything, but he's always cold. And when he leaves, he walks alone. That's not right." Miles exhaled, leaning back. He thought about the boy's arm that had once been burned, the bandages he always changed himself, the way he never once mentioned where he went after each session. The next Sunday, Jaden was late. It was the first time. Miles checked his watch twice. Lila began bouncing her knee, barely, but she was doing it on her own now, restless with concern. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Just when Miles was about to call the hospital to ask for Mrs. Whitaker, Jaden appeared. But he wasn't alone. A girl about his age followed him. Smaller, thinner, with the same almond-shaped eyes and a gap in her front teeth. "This is Ava," Jaden said. "My sister." Miles blinked. "I didn't know you had one." "She stays with someone most nights, but they kicked her out." Jaden wouldn't meet his eyes. "I couldn't leave her today." Lila, without a second thought, reached out and said, "Come sit next to me." Ava smiled shyly and sat. The session didn't go as planned. Jaden was distracted, tired, and quiet. His hand trembled once while placing the heat pack. Miles finally stepped in. "Jaden," he said gently, "you can't carry all of this by yourself." The boy looked up, the fight flickering in his eyes. "If I don't, who will?" And that was when Miles knew. Not guessed. Knew. He knelt down beside Jaden and said, carefully, "I don't want to offer charity. I want to offer family." Jaden shook his head. "You don't even know me. You fixed my daughter." Miles said, "You brought her back to life. I know enough." Jaden looked down at his sister, who was now laughing softly with Lila as they played with blades of grass. "You sure your neighbors won't care?" he asked. Miles smiled. "After what you've done, they'll thank me for letting you in." Jaden didn't answer right away. He packed his towel slower than usual. But then, as the sky shifted from gray to gold, he nodded once. "Okay," he said, "but only if Ava comes too." "Of course," Miles replied. That night, 2 small backpacks were placed by the front door of the Grant home. 2 bowls of soup were served at the kitchen table, and for the first time in years, every chair was filled, not just with people, but with something more. Wholeness. The 6th Sunday bloomed with an energy none of them could quite explain. It wasn't just that Lila's feet were moving more freely now, or that Jaden finally had a warm bed to sleep in and a door he could close at night. It was the feeling that something was building. Like a song that had started with a single note and was now swelling into harmony. Jaden arrived at Piedmont Park earlier than usual, this time with Ava skipping at his side and a new gym bag slung over his shoulder, one that Miles had bought him quietly. No questions asked. The towel was laid down beneath the big oak tree like always, but beside it now was a second mat, and beside that, a third. Not long after they started stretching, a woman approached with a boy leaning heavily on a walker. "Are you the one who helped the Grant girl?" she asked softly. Jaden looked up, unsure what to say, but Miles stepped in. "He is," he said, "and he's the reason she's smiling again." The woman nodded once, then looked at her son. "We'll wait." And they did. That day, after finishing Lila's session, Jaden turned to the boy and knelt without hesitation. "What's your name?" he asked. "Carlos." The boy mumbled. "You want to try?" Jaden asked. Carlos looked uncertain, but when Jaden handed him a soft towel and smiled, he nodded. From that point on, Sundays became something else entirely. Word spread, not because of flyers or Facebook posts, but because people started talking. A woman from a nearby church told her cousin. A nurse whispered about it at the hospital. Soon, every week brought new faces, kids in braces, teens with tremors, parents holding hope like it might break in their hands. And always. Jaden started with Lila. No matter who was waiting, he still spoke to her like she mattered most, still smiled when her foot pressed down with purpose, still cheered the small victories like they were Olympic gold. Miles had stopped bringing his laptop to the park. Now he brought a fold-out chair, a cooler with snacks, and bottles of water for the growing crowd. Ava helped set up, laying out towels, organizing the donated rice packs they now had dozens of. Thanks to a local church, Jaden never let it get flashy. "It's not about me," he told Miles one afternoon. "It's about them." But people began to notice. A local reporter showed up, discreet but curious. She sat in the back, scribbling in a notepad. Her eyes wide as a girl with a stroke lifted her own arm for the first time in 6 months. When the article ran in the Atlanta Sunday Post, it didn't mention Jaden's full name. That was his only condition. No fame, no spotlight, just the story. The headline read, "A boy with healing hands teaches a city to walk again." Miles framed it, but didn't hang it in the house. He gave it to Jaden instead, who kept it folded in his sketchbook, tucked behind a drawing of his mother's hands. And though the attention brought offers, nonprofits, therapists, even a local clinic asking to sponsor him, Jaden never missed a Sunday, never turned away a parent, never forgot where it started, with a girl who had stopped believing she could walk, and a boy who simply believed it for her until she could again. Each time Lila stood, she did it with more certainty. Each time she tried a new step, her knees held steadier, and each time Jaden guided her. It was with the same patience, the same quiet magic. No stage, no miracle, just heart, just work. Just a reminder that sometimes healing doesn't begin in a hospital. It begins in a park, under an oak tree, with a towel, a rice pack, and a boy who refused to stop showing up. The seventh Sunday came with a kind of stillness that wasn't silence, but anticipation, like the park itself knew something was about to change. The sun cut through the clouds in quiet streams of gold, and even the wind held its breath. Jaden sat up like always. Towel, rice pack, tennis ball. But this time, he barely spoke. Lila didn't ask questions. She didn't giggle or fidget. She sat still, her fingers folded in her lap, eyes focused on the space in front of her like she was preparing for something sacred. Miles stood behind her, heart pounding louder than he cared to admit. Around them, families gathered in a wide circle. Some held coffee cups, others clasped hands. A few were still strangers to each other, but all had shown up for one reason: to witness what they hoped was possible. Jaden knelt in front of Lila and whispered, "Today's different." She nodded. "I know." They had practiced standing together, always with his hands on her knees, Miles supporting her upper body, Lila pressing her heels into the mat like she was grounding herself in courage. But today, there was no warm-up, no let-in, just readiness. Jaden looked at Miles. "You lift, I balance." Miles nodded. "On 3? Jaden turned back to Lila. "You do the rest." She closed her eyes, breathed in, breathed out. 1, 2, 3. Miles lifted gently under her arms. Jaden steadied her knees, and Lila stood, not with wobbles or slips, not like before, but tall. Her legs quivered, yes, but they held. The circle around them went silent. Even the wind paused. And then, without warning, Jaden slowly removed his hands. Miles followed. For one breathtaking second, Lila stood on her own. Then another. Her eyes opened. I'm standing." A cry burst from somewhere in the circle. A woman covered her mouth. Someone whispered a prayer. But Lila didn't move. She wasn't finished. With a deep inhale, she lifted one foot, then the other, a tiny step forward, then a second, then, like something ancient waking up inside her, she took a third and fell into her father's arms, laughing and crying at once. "You did it!" Miles choked. "You really did it!" She looked up at him. "Jaden said I could." Jaden stepped back, face unreadable, but eyes full of something deeper than pride, relief, fulfillment. He didn't speak. He never did when it mattered most. That afternoon, no one left right away. People stayed. They hugged. They cried. Parents knelt beside their children, hopeful again. Therapists exchanged numbers. And Jaden? He sat on his bench, arms around Ava, watching. Not because he needed credit, but because it was enough to see the ripples. That night, back at the Grant house, Jaden poured cereal into 2 bowls while Ava drew stick figures walking in a line across the kitchen counter with dry erase markers. Miles leaned against the sink, arms crossed, watching them like someone afraid to speak in case the moment vanished. Then he said quietly, "You changed everything." Jaden didn't look up. "I didn't." "Yes," Miles said firmly. "You did. Not with machines or degrees or promises. You changed it because you showed up, again and again, even when no one asked you to." Jaden was quiet for a while. Then, without turning around, he whispered, "That's what my mom would have done." Miles's voice broke. "I think she's proud." Jaden nodded once. "I hope so." The next week, a sign appeared on the fence near the oak tree in Piedmont Park. "Free movement Sundays, all welcome." Below it, in smaller letters, "No money, no judgment, just belief." And people kept coming. The circle grew, not just in size, but in spirit. And every Sunday, Lila walked a little further. Carlos stood a little taller. New names arrived. And always. Jaden started with the same question. "What do you want to try today?" Because he knew healing was never just physical. It was remembering you were more than your limitations, more than what people assumed, more than the worst thing that ever happened to you. And in the heart of the city, under an old tree, on a towel older than the movement itself, a boy with nothing gave hundreds, something they hadn't known they'd lost. Hope that walks. If this story moved you, don't just watch, share it. And if you've ever known a child like Jaden or a fighter like Lila, drop their name in the comments. Let the world remember them.